Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Natural Resource, Energy, and Climate Adaptation. Your webinar instructor is Amy Wilson, founder and principal consultant of C Renewal, LLC. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. You can access today's presentation slides available for download as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the courses page. That'll be in the left-hand section under courses. Just be very careful. If you click anywhere on that red side, you will be taken out. Have no fear if you're taken out. Just click that green banner at the top. But all your courses and all of the materials can be found under the courses section. And like I just mentioned, how to join is the green bar. If you get kicked out or for any reason you need to rejoin, have no fear. You just click that green bar and you will be joined right back into today's webinar. Once you join today's webinar, it's going to ask you to speak plus listen or listen only. Please always select listen only to avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing the webinar audio from, you can go ahead and do so by clicking this phone icon. We'll bring up a list of your speaker/mic devices so you can select the one you prefer. Some ways you can interact during today's webinar is the shared notes section, and then there's also a chat area where you can type in your questions or any comments you would like during today's webinar. As we get started, let's introduce ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and send into the chat your name, where you're joining us from, your work or role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation. A final note, once again, if you click anywhere in this red section, you will be taken out of the webinar. So just remember to join back in is to click the green banner. And with that being said, I now gladly pass it over to Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, NAHASDA, for the introduction. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to get right into it. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, please let us know. So, excuse me. Sorry, let's see here. Okay. Yes, so today's webinar is on natural resource, energy, and climate adaptation plans. I have experience in developing all of these plans. My background includes over 15 years of experience in planning, land use, economic development in various jurisdictions. And I also have advanced degrees in land use and also natural resource and energy law. So today, we will cover all three, the natural resource, energy, and climate adaptation plans. These are plans that are especially for tribes meant to assist in helping to assert sovereignty over your lands and resources, to really enhance resiliency, and to try to minimize or mitigate and respond to any environmental consequences of climate change or natural resource change in natural resource conditions. And then these plans are also meant to promote resource conservation and just to overall improve your resource quality overall. So for today, what I'm hoping that you get out of this is to understand the key differences between all of the plans, but also recognize the key features across all the plans, because they are similar but serve different functions. And then towards the end of the session, I'll get into ways that you can use these plans to justify funding requests. So as we get started, I really want to, emphasize the interdependency between natural resources and sustainability. This really describes this, tightly bound interdependent relationship that requires that we look at, not just natural resources and not just energy or climate, but really to consider them together, and then also the social and economic factors that go along with that. These are, overlapping subjects and overlapping issues, and especially for tribal nations, we're talking about overlapping political jurisdictions. You have these cultural relationships with your land and resources, citizenship in terms of your tribal nation, but also, outside of that, and now we work in a global environment too. So taking all of that into consideration, along with the economies and the natural resources that aren't confounded by boundaries, that traverse, boundaries, and need to be evaluated based on a large macro scale. So changing conditions, both in economic conditions, social conditions, and ecological conditions, really create an environment that we need to consider all of how climate and energy and natural resources are impacted by our changing conditions. But sustainable yield, is one factor or example of the importance of these plans, greenhouse gas emissions, and then also resource quality. So changing conditions do present barriers, but they also present areas of opportunity. Changing conditions set higher expectations for how we use and manage the land. As we learn more about our management practices, and as conditions, change, as new areas of job, or employment opportunities arise, these create opportunities. So it's important to understand the interdependent relationships so we can really minimize the adverse effects of the changing conditions, but also to maximize the opportunities that come out of that. So these plans really do serve as a fundamental tool for evaluating existing conditions and helping to come to consensus, agreeing on goals around your community, environment, and economic systems. Each of these plans, natural resource, energy, and climate, really focus on, as I said earlier, different aspects of our environment, of how we manage that, and the sustainable practices that we can implement to help conserve our environment and improve our environment. All of these plans have similar features, and they overlap. Many tribes have separate, natural resource, energy, and climate adaptation plans. They'll have these as separate plans, but they overlap, and they should, overlap. They should support each other. And to the extent that they don't, it needs to be noted and identified. Those areas that have maybe conflicting goals or policies, that needs to be at minimum identified, and then in future planning addressed. So yeah, in that last point, the functionality and overall success of these plans depend on the way that planning considerations are designed and implemented. I think probably everyone has been involved in planning or not, to the extent that plans are really developed from the outside and not inclusive of the staff and the leadership and community members that they're meant to serve, those plans aren't they're not very effective. So you're probably, at least at some point in your career have been involved where plans are sitting on the shelf and not being used. And that's probably a likely, factor of that. I've found in my career and working with tribes that, the more that people are engaged in that process, that they are implemented for a long time to come, and they're built on and they're enhanced over the years. So it is really that planning process is critical. So, when they are used appropriately, they can really make a large impact in a short amount of time. And I'm not going to go, really far into this, but last week at the Seminole Tribe of Florida's conference, I had a session or a presentation on the Metlakatla Indian community, a 10-year case study on them. And, in 10 years, it's amazing what they've done. And they have a range of energy and natural resource projects and economic projects that have just made incredible impact for their community for generations to come, and really have translated into over $82 million in funding from various places for these, implementation, really significant projects. The Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma is another example of a tribe that, in a very short amount of time, in just a couple of years, what they've done with their plans, a huge impact. And we're talking, generational change. So also in my experience, what I see a lot, like I said, these plans aren't tailored to the local needs. Communities and tribal members and leaders really aren't brought into the process, or, to the extent they are brought into the process, it's just really minimal. You have the planning firm or the consultant just, kind of developing the plan and then providing the deliverable, but no one's really included in that process. It's not developed as a team. And when the process isn't inclusive, when you don't treat those you're working with as part of your team, it's not effective. And I think a lot of this, especially with tribal communities, it's, as this third or second point says, the design of many plans is like this vestige of an era of institutional plans, where the BIA would come in and develop these plans without tribal consultation, without the tribes involved, and just this really hands-off approach. So this is just kind of continuing that, and it's it's not effective, especially as tribes have taken over those roles, right, that the BIA historically had, and you're now in a position where you're able to return to your own practices of how you manage those lands. So really making these plans yours is critical. So as I said, making these plans yours is critical. And how do you do that? You do that by starting with a solid foundation. And to me, a solid foundation is looking at what you already have, starting with your constitution, and then going out from there, looking at your policies and your laws, your law and order code. Look at what plans you do have in place, the plans that you like, and also the plans that aren't working. Evaluate all these, use those as a starting point, as a foundation, and then go out from there. Really promoting teamwork and collaboration in that process, and design these documents to be flexible. They need to be a guide. They need to have really good guardrails, but at the same time, they need to be flexible for changing conditions. You don't want to, if circumstances change, you don't want to have to start over with a plan, but rather just to adapt. And I think, always with planning, I try to develop plans for the client to grow with them, you know, that they're kind of growing together with this plan. So it isn't, so as they do grow, they don't have to completely vacate that plan, but rather just to continue building on it. So for today, again, we're going to go over these different plans, the different elements of those plans, looking at what's similar, what's different. And then I'm going to provide some planning considerations that will help you to kind of get started, I guess, and have things to think about as you go through the process if you're doing this for your own community. And then I'll outline those some steps, some high-level steps for developing a structured plan. And then getting into slightly just hitting on the justifying funding requests. I'll emphasize a couple of points that will be, you know, something to consider whenever you do use these plans for funding. And also with that, you know, for partnering. All right, guys.
There you are. Okay, you're back, Amy.
Thank you. And I was touching my mouse, but I'm not sure. I apologize. So, oh, good. Am I? Oh no, I'm not at the same place. Let's see here. Or was I at the? Yeah, I guess it did. Yeah. Okay, here we are. So, trying to remember what I was saying before I got kicked off. But yeah, so for partnering and for potential investors, you know, these plans will really help you to secure interest from investors. You know, it shows that you have a direction. It shows that you have a path forward. And, you know, if there's an investor interested in partnering with you or investing with you, this will really help to help them to make that decision, because it shows that you have invested in yourself, you've invested in your community, and you have a path forward. And that's really important. So just going to get into this. So natural resource plans are, all of these plans really serve as a strategic framework just all the way across the board. Natural resource plans, you're probably aware, really focus on protecting, managing, and conserving natural resources based on the values of that community, based on the resource conditions. You know, it's these are really meant to preserve, conserve, and utilize natural resources in a way that benefits the ecological systems. Energy plans are really focused on use, you know, use of resources, both renewable and finite resources. They may look at a diversified, you know, portfolio of how to, you know, maximize the different resources available, and also to promote reliability within the system, within the energy infrastructure system. Climate adaptation plans are really meant, really focus on mitigation of just climate change impacts, really. And also in some aspects, or in some regards, I know I've developed an emergency plan in the past, and it was really climate adaptation. I mean, it was an emergency plan that looked at water, potable water, and energy, hydro, water used for hydro. But the reason for the plan was really because of climate change. You know, those impacts were affecting their resource. So, all of these plans, again, they do overlap. They kind of feed off of each other, and they should complement each other. Again, natural resource plans really look at that sustainable yield and conservation of resources, use and non-use, and I'll get into that later. But the natural resource plans I've developed really are focused on values around these resources, and all of these plans should be focused obviously on your values, and that's why you start kind of with a strong foundation. What I recommend going from your constitution out, because a lot of times that really helps to it focuses on those values and moves out from there. As I said, energy plans are really use driven, and then climate adaptation provide those mitigative measures. So I'll first start with natural resource plans. Again, just a strategic framework to manage, to look at how you want to use those resources, conserve, and maximize. So these plans, natural resource plans, promote self-determination by ensuring that tribal and federal management is consistent with tribal goals and priorities for conservation, multiple use, and sustainable yield. These plans really do help you to assert sovereignty over your lands and your resources. They also help to ensure that federal management is consistent with federal trust obligations and responsibilities. And that's something that, I come into my work with a federal background, and I always emphasize, to my clients, to the people I work with, that, you have to make sure that those federal trust responsibilities and obligations are met, because if you don't, no one else is going to, right? So one really good way to do that is to incorporate that as a theme, within your plan. That really helps to enforce and show, where federal resources should be put to ensure that obligation is maintained and I guess, recognized and paid attention to. And let's see here. So these plans also should, and you'll see this kind of just as a theme across all these plans, but they really provide a framework or serve as a mechanism to provide access to tribal education, training, and other technical assistance and funding for the to meet and advance your goals. I think a lot of times we look at plans as, a way to make decisions and a way to get funding, but also really focusing on these plans as a tool to facilitate or to access education and training to help to implement these plans. So when you're looking at or deciding whether or not to develop a natural resources plan, these are considerations or things that you might think about or evaluate as you're making that decision. If you're in an environment where you have this kind of complex environment with overlapping jurisdictions, a lot of resources, or you have resources that are they're deteriorating due to climate change or overuse, whatever it is. A natural resource plan can help you to evaluate those conditions and to address them and decide how to move forward, and then to get the resources you need to be able to improve resource conditions, maximize sustainable yield, and really ensure that how you're managing those resources is aligned with community values. Natural resource plans are used in all sorts of environments, from within urban areas, your forest plans. So think about your forest management plans, right? Those are a resource plan. Agriculture plans, corporate lands, for timber, oil and gas, all of these have natural resource plans. Protected areas, watersheds, coastal and marine areas, and obviously indigenous and traditional lands. So it's important to remember that, as a tribe, you're likely in a place with tons of overlapping jurisdictions, right? You have the tribe, you have the county, the state, you have the feds, you have special planning jurisdictions within those areas, like watershed management area, right? So all these overlapping areas, and remember that they all have their own plans, right? So when you're developing a plan, my recommendation to you is to identify all of those plans, read them, review them, be familiar with them, create, spreadsheets or ways to track and see, what plans cover what. So you can make sure that, number one, that you are in a position to assert your sovereignty over the lands and resources within the exterior boundary, but also those, identify where your traditional lands are outside of your boundaries. Identify for natural resources, identify traditional plants and the ways that you currently and have in the past traditionally interacted with the environment. Identify all of that and see where those areas overlap in terms of your forest management plan. If there's a community forestry plan within a town, because a lot of times you will have more urban forestry plans. So again, just really looking at how these plans affect you, and remembering that all these jurisdictions will have their own plans. Some of the common features or elements of your natural resource plan will include goals and objectives, a resource inventory and assessment, stakeholder engagement, education, and outreach, and then conservation strategies and sustainable use, restoration activities, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. And you can include, best management practices, case studies. I really like including case studies in plans. And then, for areas that you don't have the data, and it's not within your budget to collect certain types of data, state that in your plan. Additional research is needed, additional funding is needed to conduct a soil study test or a watershed evaluation, so name those. Don't just say, oh, geez, we don't have that information, so we're not going to do this plan. No, it's fine. Do with what you have, do what you can with what you have, and then go out from there. But really, evaluate and do your research to see what information does exist, and as you do stakeholder engagement, that firsthand, oral history is really important. It may not be scientific, quote unquote, but it's critical. It's totally and it's valid information that should be included. I think anecdotal, especially in the absence of what I guess what we call scientific knowledge, anecdotal, it to me is just as valuable and important, if not more. So include that in your plans, and then those monitoring, evaluation, and implementation. These will be specific to your needs, but again, these are elements that will be should be incorporated into your plans. And again, these outcomes help to improve your resource conditions. A lot of times they'll increase economic returns. If you have plans for natural resources, you're looking at ways to maximize, what you have to be able to protect resource qualities, and at the end of the day, that will improve economic returns. And as I've said, the enhanced self-determination. These plans also promote employment opportunities for all different kinds of jobs in all different ranges, from entry level to advanced, from actual, like if it's a forest management plan, from having foresters to having more administrative folks. So, people with all sorts of backgrounds. This helps.
Amy, you still there?
Yes. So I did that myself this time. I pressed the red. I was trying to keep my mouse going, and I pressed the red. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
Sorry. So yeah, so don't press the red on the left side of your screen. But yeah, and these plans really help you to streamline decision making. Yeah, and I think especially with the natural resource plans, the one thing I didn't hit on is this really ensuring the long-term health and viability of your ecological systems that are covered under the plan, but also those that are indirectly covered under the plan will help to ensure the preservation and conservation of those resources. This last point on this slide, this value-added processes and industries, natural resource plans are especially valuable for looking at value-added processes and industries that are aligned with your community's goals, your tribe's goals. So moving into the energy plans, these plans are really focused on energy use, looking at ways to ensure reliable and sustainable energy supplies and cost-effective energy supplies. I mean, I think all of the tribes I work with have energy challenges, and it's expensive. Tribes, pay a lot of money for their energy. They're always the first to be pulled offline when there's an issue, and the last to be put back on, right? So energy plans help you to secure and evaluate and secure energy supplies. Again, really promote that self-determination to ensure that both federal and tribal management is consistent with tribal goals and priorities for your energy sources and use. And then, again, these plans, if done right, will help to increase access to tribal education, training, and other technical assistance. And I'm going to point out, too, that, a lot of federal agencies, such as the Department of Energy and also the BIA's Division of Energy and Mineral Development, they provide technical assistance and services that are really fundamental to these plans. And like the Department of Energy, I think they have a program where they will work with you to develop these plans. But, leverage those resources for sure. Energy plans both have a proactive and a reactive component, which I guess all plans do, but especially, energy plans, you're looking at ways to, in terms of a proactive approach, you're looking at ways to address energy needs and improve access and reliability, as I said, and anticipate resource constraints in a proactive manner, looking at policies that will help ensure or incentivize conservation, remembering that conservation is a big aspect, or should be a big aspect, of energy plans. And then reactive, as I was discussing earlier in this presentation with the relationship between like an emergency plan and an energy plan. In my experience, I've done one that was, essentially an energy plan. And that was a reactive plan where you're, there's a reason why you have to address something like right now. And it's, because of shifts in changing conditions. But that when you're developing plans to be reactive, there should be components built into it that help to mitigate future, the conditions that, or the factors that led you to this kind of reactive state. Again, tribal communities, regional and local jurisdictions, at a national level, energy plans are developed, organizational and corporate level energy plans are developed, and then obviously at an international level too. So again, I think the natural resource plans, it's critical to be, very familiar with all of the plans within your jurisdiction. Energy plans too, it's critical to know what everyone's doing, what infrastructure is there, who's using what, again, being familiar with all of the plans in your area and knowing that all of these different jurisdictions and organizations are conducting planning. So similar to the natural resources plan, you're going to have, goals and objectives. This one, instead of, the natural resource assessment, you're going to have an energy demand and supply assessment. Stakeholder engagement, education, outreach will be a component of your plan. Efficiency and conservation should be a component of your plan. And then looking at ways to integrate renewable energy, infrastructure development and modernization, looking at, the policy and regulatory framework, both, the existing and future, and then your environmental and social impact, and then implementing and monitoring. All of these, again, are really, consistent with natural resource plans, but they need to be tailored to your community, all of those elements. A cookie cutter plan isn't effective. So you need to make sure that they're highly tailored to your circumstances. And similar to the natural resources plan, these plans really help you to set a direction, to follow that direction, to be prepared, be resilient to changes, to changing conditions, and really to kind of have the ball in your court, so to speak. Improving that access and reliability to be able to get the resources you need to do that. These plans also, in terms of the energy plans, help to promote, a diversified portfolio of energy supplies. And again, I would, highly recommend that you reach out to the Department of Energy and BIA and other agencies that provide these technical assistance services, at least on the front end of projects. I always like to include the feds, on the front end of projects anyway, to see what kinds of technical assistance they can provide, and then, complement that with any external services that you have, any consulting services, or also, anything that your staff is doing. So, you're probably not going to want to rely on one, thing or the other. Make sure that you're able to leverage all of these resources to create a really beneficial plan for you, for your community. And then climate adaptation plans, again, those are really looking at, the mitigative components of how do we minimize, greenhouse gas emissions, or minimize erosion, the things that are really affecting communities within your, that specific area, because it is some, these a lot of times are specific to areas, help you to become more resilient to the threats that you're experiencing. So climate adaptation plans help you to, again, look at those risks and vulnerabilities, weigh those out, and to be able to identify a strategy to better adapt to those and mitigate or minimize any effects from that, both to your health, human health and safety, but also to resource quality. These plans are really valuable for being able to tap into new areas of economy and jobs. It's a lot of new innovative jobs that these plans can really help to kind of retool a community to be prepared to take some of these new clean energy jobs. And again, serving as an access for tribal education and training and technical assistance. These climate adaptation plans, you'll want to, and some of these plans are required too for funding, right? So a lot of plans and hazard mitigation plans, obviously those are, they're a requirement for funding. So a lot of times communities will develop them because of that. But they should be looked at too as a means, for promoting the sustainable development and really taking an opportunity to look at your laws and policies on an in-depth level. So, kind of making sure that these plans meet multiple objectives within your organization, not that you're just trying to meet, one objective with that, but really looking at it at a holistic approach. Climate adaptation plans can be, general, where you kind of cover lots of different areas with that, or they can be specific, a coastal management plan, an agricultural, plan. They can be specific to certain natural resources. If you're looking at erosion, those kinds of things. Again, these are can be really broad in scope, or they can be really narrow in scope. And this is why they are so overlapping. I think that all of the plans that I've done, include some aspect of all of these. And I'm sure with everyone here that's on this webinar, I'm sure it's the same for you. That all of your plans will include some aspect of these. But I think, in this last one, this wildfire plan, or wildfire zones, that is a specific climate adaptation plan, especially in California, and me, where I'm at, New Mexico. We had a horrific fire last year, just awful. It came literally right up to my office and then my house, and I live 10 minutes from my office, and the whole, the fire almost took out both my house and my office at the very same time. These are very, very scary things. So looking at, taking the time to evaluate these on a planning level, it just increases your resilience to these and helps you to be able to, if there is an event, that you're able to rebound from that quickly. Again, these plans and plan elements, just like with your natural resource and energy plans, you have goals and objectives. You have your risk and vulnerability assessment, which is similar to your natural resource inventory or your energy usage, right? Stakeholder engagement, adaptation strategies. So again, this is kind of where these plans are similar. They have similar elements, but how they're developed is, or their functionality is a little bit different. And similar to the natural resource and energy plans, these plans really help you to be better prepared, especially, with climate climate plans help you to mitigate that damage and protect the community with, like I said, with the wildfire plan, or with the plan that I did that was an emergency plan, but is essentially was a climate adaptation plan. They were in the situation that they were in because of climate change. These plans will help you, especially these climate plans will help you for immediate funding. A lot of times they help you to, declare an emergency, to be able to, identify areas that need to be addressed, like, right now, versus areas that need to be addressed in the future that aren't so pressing. I think I think aside from the community component, where plans are just so valuable in bringing communities together, it's critical. I think that the last point, that streamlined decision making, is fundamental. Your plans, that it helps to avoid ad hoc decisions, because if you don't have these plans, you do have decisions that are being made in an ad hoc manner, kind of flying by the seat of your pants and don't really have a direction. There's nothing to keep people accountable, and that just can create a lot of problems, especially when you're already dealing with a lot of problems. And so having these plans in place will put you ahead. Well, definitely ahead, even if you're in a situation where you feel like you're behind. You starting, wherever you start from, you're gonna be able to build it from there. And I think it's just important, just making that first step. With this, by taking timely action, communities can prevent severe damage, reduce recovery costs, and ensure long-term environmental and economic stability. And I think this is very true. These plans are really, truly valuable and directly affect public health and safety, especially these climate-driven plans. Protecting life and property can help to, reduce your threat to that, reduce, insurance costs in a lot of ways. You're protecting the environment and promoting that innovation and resilience aspect, and creating jobs, in a lot of ways too. So I've talked a lot, already about these kind of key features across all of these plans. They all do, work to promote sustainability and resilience in the face of environmental changes. They help to, ensure and direct the, responsible management of resources. I think including, best management practices in your plans is a really good way to do that, to ensure that. And then having stakeholder input and communication and community involvement around these plans is important, and all of these plans include that. And then all of these plans at the end of the day do help you to create a more sustainable, healthy environment that has a stronger, economy. So, like I said, these plans are overlapping. They support each other. You can have one plan that has kind of components of all of these, or individual plans. All of these plans, have goal setting, community resilience, sustainability, risk assessment, and management, should be data driven, should have a policy component, and again, that stakeholder engagement. So for planning considerations, on the onset, or when you first start the planning process, be really clear on the capacity that you envision the plan serving, and that's going to be, council, so like everybody's using the plan in a different way, right? So make sure that you're really clear on how just as an organization, everyone's using the plan, and within the organization, how everyone will be using the plan and how you envision to use a plan, what your expectations are for that. Identifying resource areas that are regarded as high value or need special attention is really important to do when you first start the planning process, and then throughout keep kind of evaluating that, keep kind of going back to those resources to ensure that there is consensus around these kind of high value resources. I like to, and especially in natural resource plans, but really in all of these plans, I think it's helpful to have like kind of management areas or management zones, and to develop your plan around those management zones instead of just having like one huge area, kind of focusing on management zones within your plan. And it helps to kind of break it down. But it's, whatever makes sense for your jurisdiction and for your goal, for your overall, purpose or goal. So, again, just asking like, what is the purpose of this plan? And like I said earlier, some of these plans are required to get funding. So, okay, that might be your primary purpose for the plan. You got to have it to have be eligible for funding under whatever agency. But what are the other, purposes or goals or intentions for that plan? Is this plan going to be an advisory plan, or is it going to be binding? Meaning, if the plan needs to be changed, is there, in your tribal law and order code, do you have to go through a process to get to amend that plan? Or is it just like a guiding advisory document that you should be following, but if you go outside the boundaries of the plan, that it's okay? So be clear on that on the front end. And what are the expectations? Are you trying to improve the resource qualities, set management activities, identify what department's doing what, who's responsible for what? Are you trying to educate the community? Are you trying to encourage conservation of resources while you're developing this plan? And then is expanded scoping needed to facilitate consensus and clarify planning goals? And I've experienced this several times with projects where I get in on the front end of projects, and then as you get into it, you're like, ooh, I think the scope's going to have to be expanded. And what does that really look like? So really working together, putting like, if you have a consultant, making sure they're providing you all the educational and informational materials on their front end, so you can be super clear on what all the factors that are involved, so you can make a decision on the scope of that project, if it does need to be expanded, or where focus needs to be. Make sure that you have in front of you all the information needed to make really informed decisions about the project on the front end of that. So things that I would recommend looking at, on the front end of these projects to really be clear on the planning purpose is any tribal resolution that was adopted or motion that's supporting the development of that plan. That the tribal resolution or motion will have language within that identifies, the value and the purpose or the goal of leadership for that document. Review that and make sure that your scope covers those areas. Solicitations, if it is a project that's funded through a grant, or if you're developing it to be eligible for funding, study the solicitation, study the enabling laws around that, because that'll help you to also know where you need to expand or narrow your scope for these projects. If you're a staff member and maybe came into a project later, look for the requests for proposals that were developed for this project. Refer to those to make sure that everything's within the scope of the project, you know, the approach. And then lean on your consultants too for recommendations on the planning purpose. Like for me, I'm on travel right now, and that's what I'm here working with the Housing Authority on this preliminary planning, you know, this phase, and it's critical. Here for 3 days, you know, really working with them to nail down the purpose and the expectations for going forward. You know, being clear that planning goals and plan goals are two separate things. And on the front end of these projects, really have clear planning goals. Examples are, you know, facilitate a highly collaborative planning process, identify future uses. You know, a planning goal would be to encourage responsible resource development practices that consider potential impact on other resources. So, you know, the planning goal is we need to be able to evaluate how all of these resources are used. We want to be able to, you know, gather as much information as possible to make these informed decisions. And then a planning goal, an example of that is to align existing plans and policies with this new planning and document. And then defining and implementing guidelines. So those are really good, you know, standard kind of planning goals. And then an example, and I put this in here just because sometimes it is confusing, you know, planning goal versus a plan goal. The planning goal is on, you know, the front end of a project in that preliminary stage, where plan goals are what's, you know, implemented into your plan. So these are, you know, examples. This would be community and wildlife. Example to, you know, continue promoting diversity and supporting subsistence. But, you know, again, really focusing on those planning goals in the front end of a planning project. Don't just kind of skip the preliminary planning process, because that helps you to make sure that your overall planning process helps you to get to the right, you know, plan goals. Helps you to focus that scope. So and this is more for natural resource plans, but also for energy and climate plans a little bit. But one way to consider resource areas is to evaluate or think of these resources in terms of resources that are used to produce a final usable or marketable product, and then the benefits that are derived from those resources and activities. And this can be both like from a commercial kind of a perspective, but also from a traditional perspective, where you have you know, traditional gathering and traditional plants, you know, looking at it, because at the end of the day, you know, those resources are producing a final product that you're using for consumption of some way, or using it for your traditional materials. So considering resources of value for all, you know, for cultural, social, economic, environmental purposes, including those that support that sustainable yield and community needs. And again, you know, a lot of these are probably going to overlap. You know, resources that are valuable for cultural purposes are also valuable for economic, and splitting those apart and being clear on that is important. And if you name that at the beginning of a project, then you're going to be, you know, clear going into it. Another way to kind of frame this, especially with natural resource plans, is looking at, you know, resources as a means of production for that final, you know, product. So the production, like I did a natural resource plan, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I looked at land as a means of production for your built environment, you know, and what that did is help to look at land in a different way. You know, like, what do we need to be able to facilitate a certain land uses? So, you know, being, I guess, kind of thinking outside of the box in a way. and then considering those benefits that are derived. So this is an example of primary means of production and then benefits that are derived from that. So, for example, an ocean or streams, that's your natural resource, and the product is fish, right? Ocean, seaweed, kelp, streams, soil, dams, like harvested water, right? Water that is used for storage. That's your product. If you're storing this harvested water for consumptive or other, purposes. Mined rock, again, these are your resource and your product. And then on the far right hand side of your screen where you have the benefits derived. So, streams and soil, that's your natural resource. And, it's your product is the fish, but the description of that is like an ecological resource, and it's producing, earth health. Like if you're considering, for example, watersheds, that's, these are, it's a ecological environment that's producing earth health. If you're looking at timber, the description of this is, firewood, wood chip, enterprise. And again, these are just examples. The benefits of that are, social. You're keeping people warm. You're providing jobs. So, that's where the economic gets in. But also on the flip side of that, if you are, say, conserving timber resources, that conservation could be for earth health, cultural purposes. So, really looking at these from, the resource and the benefits that go along with that and the products that are associated, because they will overlap. But seeing where all those areas overlap is important. Other considerations, using these plans, obviously, for managing, planning, and enforcing rules. These plans are critical for that, and critical for making rules and having enforcing rules to protect your resources and identify these overlapping management areas. And I've used this in previous slides, this management activities, because it's really valuable. I use it, or I think about things in kind of in this manner when I'm developing different types of natural resource and land use and plans, because you have resources that you directly use, that you indirectly use. You have non-use resources. These are resources that you're preserving for a future value or for a future purpose. And then you have use of resources like your landfills, areas of pollution. These are areas that the land and the resources are like holding onto our waste. So these are, again, just kind of planning considerations as you're developing these plans, something that you might want to consider or think about. This table, in retrospect, it's not, I should have went with like a soils. So over on the left-hand side of the table in that first column, you have resources. I should have probably used like soils. That would have been a better example. But so for this table, that first column lists the resources. So here I have vegetation and wildlife, but that could also be like water, like streams, terrestrial streams versus like coastal or ocean waters, any resource. And then we have the direct use and the non-use in the columns that follow. Under direct use, we have consumptive, passive, and indirect use. And then under that non-use section, there's two columns, conservation and future use. And then off to the very far right, that's that use of resource. And with this example, because I used the wrong example, vegetation and wildlife, and we don't have anything in the use of category because it doesn't fit. But when you think about vegetation and wildlife, you probably are using these resources in all of those ways, in a consumptive use, in a passive use, indirect use, for viewing pleasure, for nature, for just the value, the value of those resources, for their inherent value, and for your the way your cultural and traditional values are around those resources. Vegetation and wildlife are, within every jurisdiction are different, but there's probably conservation and future use there, for sustainable yield of both wildlife and vegetation. I know, like, working with tribes, a lot of times, your traditional plants, those are looked at differently and protected in different ways. So that's kind of where these tables come in terms of the conservation and future use. And again, this wasn't the best example in retrospect. I was trying to be consistent with the wildlife and vegetation, the example I provided earlier. So, but example where consistency didn't pay off. But so with this little table, or this little concept check section, it just really points out that really being aware of the interdependency of your different resources, whether it's just a natural resource plan or an energy plan or climate plan, even if it's a separate plan, be mindful of these interdependent relationships that all of these resources have with each other, because that's just going to enhance the current plan that you're working on, but also future plans. These plans help to assess the changing conditions. So, making sure as you are developing these plans to really thoughtfully evaluate, what are your current, your past and your anticipated opportunities and barriers, and anticipated conditions. So you can just really be strategic around developing these plans. I've spoke a little bit about, these tailored plans throughout the planning process, but those, tailored plans are really ones that incorporate, the applicable laws and policies, really looking at gaps, and setting, a realistic strategy forward based on your situation. So again, just making sure that those are really tailored to your needs. So with this last part, I'm just going to get into some steps for developing a structured plan. I'm going to talk about the preliminary planning phase, planning, plan making, and implementation. I feel like the preliminary planning phase is fundamental to a planning process, and it's skipped a lot. A lot of times, people don't engage in preliminary planning, and it takes time, because and for some people it's like annoying because they're like, like, I just want to create a plan and go forward, So preliminary planning is like creating a plan for a plan. So some people find that really annoying, and I respect that and I get that. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, but you should have it, because it really is fundamental to setting the direction of the plan. This process should result in a developed work plan. That work plan can be really valuable to you as the planning process is going forward. You can refer to that, if you're trying to get funding for something, instead of waiting for the 12 or 18 months till the planning process is over and you get like the final deliverable plan. Having this approved work plan will help you to leverage that throughout the planning, process. You can refer to that. Say, we don't have such and such plan in place, but we have this work plan that's been approved, and we're developing the subsequent plan. So it just kind of helps you to get additional resources during that planning process. It also protects you, if there's like a shift in administration or other changes, it helps to protect your projects and kind of keep everything going forward. During this preliminary planning phase, you'll want to identify any and develop any memorandums of agreement that are needed, any directives that are needed to help initiate and get continued support for that planning process. These are examples here of preliminary planning activities. You have this legislative activity would be creating a tribal resolution, adopting the work plan, or, and that sometimes tribal resolutions are created at the front end of projects before, like I said, before you do your RF, your request for proposal even. So that's an example of a pre-planning activity. Memorandums of understanding, tribal directives here, and then advisory. So, this table just really kind of breaks and details out. So you might want to refer to that in the future, or, if you want additional information. So your planning stage or your planning phase includes the data collection, both primary and secondary data. So, and subject matter research, and this will include everything from community input to researching for what's been documented, doing legal surveys of law and policy, kind of all of the above. It should include, the planning phase should include a really in-depth, detailed evaluation of all of your data, and then interim reporting. I know, like for my clients, they get a ton of interim reports from me that really show all of the data that's been collected and evaluated, how it relates, where the gaps are, where there's inconsistencies, if there is. And then the planning phase includes forming the vision and goals, based on consensus and based on all the information you've gathered, and then developing and agreeing on a general strategy to advance those goals. So again, with this plan writing tip, I can't emphasize enough that how important it is to really conduct a thorough evaluation of all of your laws and plans. And these are, even local and regional plans outside of your boundaries or any overlapping authorities. You want to be able to evaluate these. So figuring out a way to kind of capture all of your research is really important. I like matrices to do this because you can I'm a really visual person anyway, and you're able to, depending on how you develop these, you're able to see all the different subject areas and where everything overlaps. So it just makes navigating all of your research easier. And like I said, preparing those interim reports is really important. And then during the plan making phase, this is where you collect, you have all of your data, you've collected everything, you have a good direction, and this is just really compiling it and putting it together. So, make sure in your documents that everything is organized logically, using appropriate headings and subheadings, bullet points. Trying to reach all readers is really difficult because I know that everyone kind of consumes information differently. So try to create or, develop your documents in a way that will meet the needs of different people. So have, images and text boxes and things for the people that just kind of like to scan, and then provide, more narrative format for others, but have it kind of all in one document, which is the hard part, right? It's a lot of work to try to create these things. So they kind of will be appealing to everyone, but really try to put effort into that. Using professional language and concise text, incorporating supporting materials, and then, using just kind of like straightforward stuff, right? Using page numbers, graphics, tables, maps, but be really thoughtful during that process. I think it's important because you've done all the work. You really want to be able to communicate that and show all of the work that's went into it. Keeping a detailed planning record is really important. These plans are around for a really long time, so make sure that you have a tight planning record. So then in the future, in 10, 15, 20 years or longer, a lot of these plans are around 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And everyone that worked on them is pretty much gone, right? So if you have a really tight planning record incorporated into your plan, the people that are here in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they'll know what went behind, the process behind that plan, because the process is what creates the value, right? So for the people that come after you, make sure that planning record is there. And then remembering that the plan writing phase is an iterative process. You don't just start. I mean, everybody writes plans differently, but no matter how you write plans, it is this iterative process where you're like kind of developing it as you go. So you're likely not starting with one section and then oh, okay, that section's done. That you're like, all of these sections kind of feed into each other. So, remember that. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't get frustrated, because it's a process. And just remember that just like the planning, phase is a process, the plan making phase is a process too. And it can be overwhelming, but just kind of go through it. It's like a messy math problem in the beginning, but just work through it and you'll get to the end. But just be thoughtful during that process. So then, creating, I recommend adopting these plans by formal resolution. If you don't do resolutions, do a motion, because it shows the significance of that plan. Communicating plans to appropriate stakeholders is critical. If you can create plans and you can do all this work, but if they're not communicated to the public or to the stakeholders that need to be aware of these documents, then that's lost and it's not as impactful. All of your work isn't as impactful as it could be. And monitoring and adjusting these plans, making sure that they're flexible, so you can use these for a long term. So I guess, at the end of the day, these plans are, they are straightforward. They are similar. They have similar features. But, how, like, the process behind the plan will really depend on how that plan functions and ultimately determine its overall success. So, by that, I mean, like, including the right people in the process and making sure that, being clear on how people, use the resources, the energy, the areas of climate, whether it's water, whatever that you're looking at, be clear on how people are using those, but also on that process, how they want to use the document at the end of the day. So they are straightforward, but it's also, these are also kind of complicated. As I've said before, start with your solid foundation, start with your constitution and go out. Be sure that you're including, looking at all of the overlapping jurisdictions. Really support these, innovative and out of the box linking, because these are, interrelated issues and they are complex and they do kind of demand these really forward thinking solutions. And then, try your best to design these plans to be flexible and adapt to the changing conditions and the changing, funding scenarios, like kind of just try to anticipate the best that you can on the front end of these plans. For funding, these are just a few, like they're of the funding, agencies that support or require, energy and climate change natural resource plans. And I know we're in a time of change right now with administration changes and just kind of all over the board. But I think that, planning helps you to weather those changes and helps you to be prepared. So, do the best that you can with what you have and internally and I would say, to keep, invest in plans and keep investing in plans and developing those because they are really valuable for you. But yeah, so those are just a few of the agencies. But, remembering to look at state and regional funding opportunities, public-private partnerships, not-for-profit or nonprofit intermediaries are good resources, and then CDFIs. So both for, developing these plans, but also for implementation of them. And then when you are using these plans to justify funding requests, I always recommend being really clear on the solicitation language and the enabling laws and showing how your whatever it is that your project proposal, whatever it is, demonstrating how that project proposal fully, completely aligns with your plans and your policies, and also with that solicitation or the enabling law. Like, really do a good job of communicating that, because you want to show your fit, for these projects at the end of the day. These having tying your project proposals to your plans show that there's project commitment. It shows that you don't just wake up and decide to apply for funding for, whatever it is, but that it's been thought of, planned out, agreed on. So for, any investor that's looking at that project, they know that it's more likely to succeed, and they're more at that point willing to invest in it. And then, yeah, so with this third one, just showing how that funding opportunity will advance goals and bridge gaps and helping you to meet your long-term vision, and again, tying it back to your plans. To the extent that you do have overlapping plans, a lot of communities will have several different plans. So again, highlight those within your funding proposals and show that overlap, because that just kind of underscores the importance of whatever project you're applying for. I think, just, and then when you're doing this in the supplemental section, or, they're all different how they will accept proposals, but, scan those parts of the plan and include it with your project proposals. I always highlight whatever section, copy it, scan it, or copy it, and then highlight those sections to bring for the reviewers to see them, to make it easy for them to see, oh yeah, they do have this formal plan and it's scanned in and it's page 89, whatever. But it just helps to verify that or show that. So for the key takeaways, the purpose, number one, the purpose of these natural resource, energy, and climate adaptation plans, remembering that they all serve as a strategic framework. They help you to, assert the sovereignty over lands and resources, enhance resilience, minimize adverse impacts to changing conditions. They are used to promote resource conservation and improve resource quality. Remembering that natural resource plans are really focused on conservation and sustainable yield. Energy plans are more focused on, they're more use driven. And then climate adaptation plans are really provide mitigative measures. They're, very similar. The features and the elements are kind of common across all of the plans. Goal setting, really focusing on that community resilience and well-being, sustainability, risk assessment and management. These plans all have data collection and evaluation components, policy components. These will have economic considerations and stakeholder engagement. So again, just seeing that there's these really common features across the plans. And then the takeaway number 4, using these plans to justify funding requests, really communicate, emphasize the demonstrating this alignment between your plans and the funding program and enabling law. Emphasizing how, we're committed to this as referenced or as evidenced by X, Y, and Z plans. And then, as I said just before, describing how that funding opportunity will bridge gaps and helping you to advance your goals. And then highlighting any of those overlapping plans will help to show that. For the planning process, start with that foundation, the solid foundation. Really promote teamwork and collaboration. So if you're working, with a consultant, really, work with someone that treats you like a team member. It's a team effort. It needs to be a team effort to have these successful projects. And then encourage innovative and out of the box thinking while you're doing this planning process. I know some people have really crazy ideas, and that's good. You need to encourage that, but also be realistic in your implementation steps, and design the plans to be flexible and to grow with the organization. So, all right. And I'm done. I don't know if anyone has any questions for me at all. I appreciate your time for today. I hope that this was helpful for you.
There are no questions at the time, Amy, but if there are any questions, please feel free to type them in as we're closing out, and Amy can definitely answer them as we do the closeout.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. I appreciate it. And NAHASDA and everyone else on there. So, all right. We got through, and with only one getting kicked off this time. That was my fault, though, for pressing the red button. But.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Thanks for putting up the feedback survey, Amy. I went ahead and put in the chat as well. It is anonymous, so please let us know what you thought about today's webinar. Amy does really appreciate all feedback. She likes knowing what you guys would like to know on the next webinar, so go ahead and fill that out, please. Don't forget to come and join us for the next webinar. You don't have to register since you're already registered at one time. Their next webinar is going to be 10 ways to improve relationships with grantors. It's going to be February 6th at 2 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. CST, 12 p.m. MST, 11 a.m. PST, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. You can access any of our webinar recordings, including this one, on our YouTube channel at Cathedral Webinar Archive. The link is here as well. If you're looking for a specific webinar, please go ahead and email us, and I'd be more than happy to help you send you the direct link so you don't have to dig for it. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope Thing, a Native American Podcast, which you can also listen to on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. That was a mouthful. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it and can't wait to see you on the next one, which is February 6th. I hope everybody has a good day. And thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.